There is a quiet kind of strength that goes unnoticed in a world obsessed with loud power. It is the strength of the empath, the one who listens when others speak, who forgives when others wound, who feels even when it hurts. The empath walks into rooms and immediately senses shifts in mood, subtle changes in energy, and unspoken emotions that linger in silence. And while most people take this gift for granted, the empath holds within themselves a power that is deeply misunderstood. Because at first glance the empath appears fragile. They cry during movies, they stay up worrying about people they barely know, and they apologize too much. But what society often overlooks is this simple truth. Empathy is not weakness. It is a spiritual intelligence, a heightened awareness, a connection to the invisible threads that tie human beings together. The empath absorbs the world like a sponge. They carry the emotions of others, often mistaking them for their own. And while that can be overwhelming, it's also what makes them radiant. They offer compassion without limits. They give chances that others would never consider. They love people not for what they do, but for who they are beneath all their masks. And that's why the empath is the perfect target for the narcissist. The narcissist is drawn to the empath like a moth to flame, but not because they admire the light. It's because they want to control it, to feed off it, to use it. Narcissists operate on manipulation. They seek admiration, power, and emotional fuel. And the empath, with their infinite well of compassion, is a source of endless energy. At first, it feels like a beautiful connection. The narcissist showers the empath with affection. It feels intense, magnetic, even fated. But over time, the narcissist begins to take more than they give. They invalidate the empath's emotions, twist their words, and rewrite their reality. The empath, in their pure heart, tries to fix things. They believe if they love harder, communicate better, or stay patient, the narcissist will change. But they won't, because the narcissist doesn't want change. They want control, and they have mistaken the empath's kindness for submission. But here is where the shift begins. Because the empath, though slow to anger, is not endlessly tolerant. Every empath has a breaking point, a moment of awakening, a moment where the tears dry, the silence settles, and the soul whispers, "Enough." It's a sacred moment, a turning point. The empath doesn't yell, they don't fight. They simply see things clearly for the first time. And once they see the truth, they cannot unsee it. Alan Watts once said that the quieter you become, the more you can hear. And in this quiet, the empath hears the truth of their own spirit. They realize that empathy must have boundaries, that love must be reciprocal. That peace is not found in pleasing others, but in honoring oneself. The empath begins to pull back, to observe, to rebuild their inner world. And this is where the true danger lies. Not for the empath, but for the narcissist. Because the most dangerous empath is not the one who reacts emotionally, but the one who detaches spiritually. When the empath walks away, they do not look back. They do not seek closure. They do not send final texts. They disappear into peace. And for the narcissist, whose power relies on being seen and heard, this silence is unbearable. The empath transforms. They are no longer a sponge. They are a mirror. They reflect truth. They no longer absorb toxicity. They expose it, and they do so without a word, without vengeance, without chaos. It is this quiet strength that makes the healed empath more powerful than the narcissist ever imagined. So, if you are an empath listening to this, know this truth. Your power is not in how much you feel for others. It's in how deeply you honor yourself. When you reclaim your energy, when you choose clarity over confusion, when you walk away without fear, you become the storm the narcissist never saw coming. And now, I want to hear from you. If you've ever had a moment when you realized your empathy was your strength, share it with us. Write in the comments. My silence became my power. Let your voice be a light for others who are still searching for theirs. The narcissist's greatest miscalculation. There is one mistake the narcissist always makes. They believe that just because the empath is quiet, they are weak. That because the empath forgives, they are naive. That because the empath endures, they will always stay. But nothing could be further from the truth. The narcissist, in all their calculated moves and charm-driven tactics, severely underestimates the quiet soul who feels everything, and this miscalculation becomes their downfall. Narcissists crave attention. It is the oxygen to their ego. They are skilled actors, wearing masks that mirror the desires of their victims. At first they appear perfect, attentive, confident, full of love. But beneath the surface, their affection is conditional. Their love is a contract. I give you warmth as long as you give me admiration, as long as you validate me, as long as you remain small so I can feel large. And the empath, being pure of heart, doesn't see the game at first. They see the pain behind the narcissist's eyes. They believe they've found someone who needs healing, someone they can help with their compassion. They dive in with both feet, offering love without measure, understanding without judgment, and patience without end. But this is exactly what the narcissist counts on. They depend on the empath's emotional generosity. They know that the empath will try again and again, even after being ignored, gaslighted, or insulted. Each time the narcissist wounds, they follow it with a breadcrumb of validation, just enough to keep the empath from walking away. And for a while, it works. However, something begins to shift. The empath, though deeply loving, begins to notice patterns. They notice how their words are twisted, how their needs are minimized, how their peace is constantly disrupted. They begin to sense that their love is not being returned. They start feeling drained, used, hollow. And then comes the awakening. This awakening doesn't arrive in a loud confrontation. It arrives quietly, like the moment when you look in the mirror and no longer recognize who you've become. The empath realizes they've lost themselves in someone else's chaos, that their light has been dimmed trying to brighten someone who refuses to shine on their own. They begin to step back, not out of hate, but out of necessity. Alan Watts once said, "The more a thing tends to be permanent, the more it tends to be lifeless." And so the empath stops trying to make a dead relationship feel alive. They stop giving CPR to a connection that has no pulse. They begin to reclaim their time, their energy, and most importantly, their truth. And here lies the narcissist's panic. They don't fear arguments. They don't fear emotions. They fear irrelevance. They fear losing control. They fear being invisible to the one person who saw them without masks. And when the empath detaches, that fear becomes reality. The narcissist's control dissolves. Their grip loosens. Their strategies fail. Because the narcissist never planned for this. They never imagined the empath would stop replying, stop explaining, stop apologizing. They never expected the empath to go silent, to grow distant, to walk away with no dramatic goodbye. And it is in this moment that the tables turn. The narcissist's miscalculation was fatal. They thought they had the empath on a leash, but they were only being held by love. And once love turns to clarity, once affection gives way to self-respect, the narcissist becomes powerless. And here's the truth. The empath does not seek revenge. They don't smear, insult, or expose. They simply rise. They begin to rebuild in silence, learn in solitude, and bloom in peace. And that is what terrifies the narcissist most. Not being hated, but being forgotten. Not being confronted, but being irrelevant. So to the empath listening now, remember this. Your kindness is not a weakness. Your silence is not defeat. It is your reset. It is the sound of you returning to yourself. The narcissist's power ends the moment you stop reacting. The moment you stop needing closure. The moment you stop shrinking to fit their world. Let their miscalculation be your liberation. The moment everything changes. It doesn't happen with a loud explosion. It doesn't come with screaming or final arguments. The moment an empath decides to walk away is often quiet, almost invisible to the outside world. But internally, it is seismic. A shift so profound that the empath never looks at the narcissist the same way again. It is the moment clarity replaces confusion and peace replaces emotional chaos. This change doesn't arrive suddenly. It builds slowly, almost silently, inside the empath's soul. At first, they feel a strange fatigue, not just physical exhaustion, but spiritual depletion. They realize they are tired of explaining themselves, tired of questioning their worth, tired of being responsible for someone else's moods, reactions, and illusions. The empath has spent so much time giving that they've forgotten what it feels like to simply be. But then something happens. It can be a single phrase, a cold look, or a moment of emotional neglect. And suddenly, the illusion breaks. The empath sees through the manipulation, the false promises, the drama, the endless cycles of guilt and reward. The empath understands that they have been stuck in a loop, not because they are weak, but because they believed too deeply in someone who was only pretending to believe in them. This is the awakening. Not a storm of rage, but a quiet realization that their love has become one-sided, that no matter how much effort they give, it will never be enough to satisfy someone who is never satisfied with themselves. Alan Watts once said that trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. The empath begins to understand that in trying to define the narcissist's pain, they have lost touch with their own identity. It is in this moment that the empath stops trying to fix things. They stop trying to decode mixed messages. They stop trying to earn love. Instead, they observe. They listen not to the words, but to the silences between them. They begin to see patterns, how kindness is used as bait, how apologies are used to reset the cycle, how guilt is weaponized to prevent freedom. The empath's eyes are finally open, and once they are open, they never close again. This is the most powerful moment of all. Not because the empath fights back, but because they don't need to. They don't raise their voice. They don't argue or try to prove a point. They simply let go. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. And that clarity changes everything. The narcissist feels the shift too. Not right away, but slowly. They begin to notice that their words no longer land, that their charm no longer works, that the empath's eyes no longer light up in the same way. At first, they try harder, love-bombing, apologizing, even pretending to change. But the empath sees through it all. Their heart no longer leaps. It listens now. It remembers. And the narcissist begins to panic, because they have lost the one person who truly saw them, who cared beyond appearances, who stayed when others walked away. And the irony is brutal. The narcissist loses everything the moment they realize what they had was real. But it's too late. The empath doesn't leave with rage. They leave with grace. They don't announce it. They just vanish emotionally. They stop engaging. They stop reacting. And eventually they stop caring. This is what makes a fed-up empath more dangerous than the narcissist ever imagined. Because the empath doesn't destroy the narcissist. They simply become untouchable. In that moment, the empath chooses themselves. They choose solitude over chaos, truth over illusion, self-love over self-sacrifice. They begin to rebuild their life with boundaries, silence, and inner peace. And slowly, they come back to life, not as someone who needs approval, but as someone who knows their worth. Alan Watts once said, "The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance." And that's exactly what the empath does. They join the dance of their own healing. Not looking back, not seeking revenge, just moving forward with strength the narcissist never saw coming. Why the empath always wins in the end? At first, it may not look like victory. When the empath walks away, they do not slam the door. They do not scream their truth to the world. They do not seek validation for their suffering. In fact, they often leave quietly, without explanation, without drama. To the outside world, it might seem as though the narcissist has won, that they've discarded the empath or moved on without consequence. But that illusion doesn't last, because real power doesn't shout, it whispers, and the most profound victories are the ones that unfold in silence. The empath always wins in the end, not because they defeated the narcissist, but because they discovered themselves. They return to their center. They rebuild what was taken. They take the wounds and turn them into wisdom. The narcissist, on the other hand, remains stuck in their loop, chasing admiration, avoiding reflection, repeating patterns they cannot escape. While the empath grows, the narcissist stays the same. That is the ultimate difference. That is the quiet triumph. When an empath finally detaches, something inside them comes alive. They begin to understand their worth not as something to be proved, but something to be protected. They learn that love without boundaries is not love, it is erosion. Alan Watts once taught that to resist change is to cling to illusion, and to embrace it is to find freedom. The empath begins to embrace change, not as an ending, but as a sacred return to self. For the first time in a long time, they breathe. They sleep without fear. They speak without editing their thoughts. They laugh without guilt. Life starts to feel lighter, clearer, more sacred. They begin to reconnect with their passions, their creativity, their spiritual life. What once felt like loss is now a rebirth. And that is something the narcissist can never access, not because they are incapable, but because they are unwilling. The narcissist does not grow. They shift masks, not behaviors. They replace partners, not patterns. They don't reflect on what they lost. They simply search for the next source of supply. But in quiet moments, when they are alone with themselves, they feel the absence of the empath. They remember the one person who truly saw them, who cared, who stayed, and they realize that they may never find that again. But the empath is not looking back. They are not waiting for the narcissist to change or apologize. They have realized that closure doesn't come from someone else's remorse. It comes from the decision to stop hurting, to stop chasing, to stop explaining themselves to people who were never truly listening. This is why the empath wins, not because they caused pain, but because they refused to carry it any longer. They chose peace over chaos, truth over illusion, growth over stagnation. They learned to guard their energy like a sacred flame, and in doing so, they became more powerful than they ever imagined. There is a moment in every empath's journey where they stop asking, "Why did they treat me like that?" and start asking, "Why did I allow it?" It is not a question of blame, but of awareness. And with that awareness comes healing, strength, boundaries, new standards for love and connection. From this place, the empath begins to attract a different world, people who give as much as they take, conversations that nourish rather than drain, relationships rooted in mutual respect, not control. The empath no longer needs to prove they are lovable. They know they are, and that knowing becomes their compass. Alan Watts once said that when you let go, you are free to be what you truly are. And in letting go of the narcissist, the empath becomes exactly that. Not a broken heart looking for repair, but a whole soul walking in purpose. They are no longer defined by the pain they endured, but by the peace they chose. So yes, the empath always wins in the end. Not with revenge, but with evolution. Not with noise, but with silence. Not with a battle cry, but with a new beginning. And that is the kind of victory that echoes forever. If you've ever felt your own rebirth after walking away from someone who tried to dim your light, share your strength with others. Leave a brief comment. I walked away and found myself again. Someone out there may need those words more than you know. There comes a time in every empath's journey when they realize they no longer need to be understood by those who misunderstood them. They no longer crave apology from those who silenced their voice. They no longer seek closure from the very person who broke the door in the first place. This moment is not loud, not dramatic, not filled with tears. It is peaceful, sacred. It is the moment the empath becomes untouchable. Untouchable does not mean hard or bitter. It means clear, awake, grounded. The empath, once so deeply affected by the moods and manipulations of the narcissist, no longer reacts. They no longer feel pulled to rescue, fix, or explain. Their silence is not a game. It is a boundary. Their distance is not punishment. It is healing. And that makes them powerful in a way the narcissist never anticipated. Alan Watts once said, "To have faith is to trust yourself to the water." When you swim, you don't grab hold of the water, because if you do, you will sink. You have to relax. This is exactly what the healed empath does. They stop clinging to what hurt them. They float. They trust that walking away was not the end, but the beginning of something better. The narcissist cannot reach them now. Not because the empath is hiding, but because they have risen. They no longer exist in the same emotional frequency. The empath now operates from a place of self-respect, not fear. From clarity, not confusion. They have become a mirror, no longer a sponge. And what does a mirror do when the narcissist comes close? It reflects. It exposes. It reveals truth without effort. This transformation did not happen overnight. It came through pain, through silence, through tears cried behind closed doors. It came through nights of self-doubt and days of learning to stand alone. But it happened. Slowly. Beautifully. And now, the empath walks differently. They speak differently. They love differently. Because they finally love themselves. In the past, they may have begged to be chosen. Now, they choose themselves. They once tolerated lies to keep the peace. Now, they tell the truth to protect their peace. They used to explain their heart in hopes someone would handle it with care. Now, they know not everyone deserves access to that depth. And that shift, that sacred shift, is everything. The narcissist may still circle, attempting to reconnect. They may send messages, drop hints, or try to rekindle what once was. But they will find nothing there, no reaction, no response, no access. The empath has changed the locks. The house is now filled with light, love, and boundaries. There is no room for manipulation. This is what makes the fed-up empath more dangerous than the narcissist ever imagined. Not because they seek revenge, but because they no longer care. Their silence is no longer fueled by hurt. It is anchored in peace. Their presence no longer seeks to be understood. It simply exists in full truth. And when someone lives in truth, they are free. This freedom terrifies the narcissist, because their entire strategy relies on control, confusion, and dependency. But the healed empath is none of those things. They are whole, independent, clear, and that clarity is the very thing the narcissist cannot stand. They can no longer manipulate, no longer twist reality, no longer play the hero in a story where the empath has stopped being the victim. Alan Watts reminds us that the only way to make sense of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. The empath has joined that dance. They are no longer stuck in someone else's story. They are writing their own, one that is filled with peace, strength, truth, and deep love. Not for a narcissist, but for themselves. So as we close this reflection, let this be your reminder. You are not weak for feeling deeply. You are not foolish for loving fully. And you are not broken for walking away. You are rising. You are healing. You are becoming untouchable, not because you built walls, but because you learned to live in truth. And truth is the most powerful protection of all. If you've reached that sacred place of inner peace, where the chaos no longer touches you, I invite you to share your voice. Leave a brief comment. I became untouchable the day I chose myself. Your words could be the light that guides someone else toward freedom.